Welcome everybody. We are at ASI Convention and we're here with Matt as always. Thank you for joining us. This is a live interview we're doing with our special guest today, Eva Tompkins, and we have some very important and interesting information to go through today. Eva, can you start us off with telling us a little bit about who you are and why you've come to ASI?
Okay, well, my name is Eva Tompkins. I'm a lawyer by trade, but I retired the practice of law in 2016, and I trade currencies. I trade currencies, equity futures, commodity futures, and I work in finance now. So, but I came to ASI. I was recently baptized in April.
Congratulations.
Thank
Praise
you.
God.
After being away from the church for like 30 years or so. That's why I'm here.
So you said you were Adventist 30 years ago. So tell us a little bit about that transition away and then how you came back.
Well, I was raised Adventist from birth and then walked away from the church when I went away to college, really. I just had some issues with the church at the time, and I just wanted to go live life and explore and go away to college, and my track was like get into a good college, focus on getting good grades, go to law school. My parents wanted me to go to an Adventist college, and I was like, no, I need to focus on law because I wanted to go to law school. So that was my focus.
So you had a step away. Why don't you take us through, like, you were raised in that, but at what age did you kind of start challenging these things, and what was it that kind of like separated you from the religion and just kind of God in general?
I kind of just had issues. I didn't believe the Revelation prophecy. That was one big point. Like, I didn't believe how it could happen. And in fact, my father and I would always have these great philosophical debates and great debates about religious doctrine and the Adventist doctrines and everything. And one day when I was 16, I had already made the decision in 7th grade that I was going to law school. But when I was 16, a visiting pastor came to our church and spoke about Revelation and the prophecies of Revelation and how we're going to come to a point where you can't buy or sell unless you have the mark of the beast, but we need to choose the seal of God. And they're going to come after people who are worshiping on Saturday and try to enact a Sunday law. And knowing, I had already been studying the law even as a high school student. I knew the Constitution inside and out. I had aspirations of one day being on the Supreme Court. It didn't happen, but I had aspirations anyway. And I knew the Constitution inside. I'm like, this can't happen. And you know how back in the day we had paper bulletins and on the back it was completely blank?
Yeah.
So I wrote point by point, argument by argument, how this could never happen. Prophecies and Revelation could never happen because we have a Supreme Court and we have a U.S. Constitution, and the First Amendment says, among all the other things the Constitution says, the First Amendment has the right to peaceably assemble and freedom of religion, the free exercise of religion.
Yeah. So from what you've seen, it didn't seem legally even possible that this apparent prophecies that are going to take place can even happen.
Correct, yeah. So I wrote out that whole argument, and my father and I debated back and forth, and it was great. It was a lot of fun. But I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it at all.
And it makes sense because, like, when you're in the world, you're like, okay, well, there are these systems in place to protect something like this from happening.
Right.
So we have to put our trust in those systems. Yet we see that something started to change in the world as a whole that maybe acted as a catalyst for you to maybe challenge that those things weren't as solid as maybe you thought. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when I went away to college, I stopped keeping the Sabbath. I just stopped going to church. I was doing my own thing because I went away to college. I wasn't living at home. My parents were always like, you live under our roof, you got to follow our rules. I'm like, well, now I'm not under your roof anymore. Problem solved.
Right.
I got to do what I want to do. So I did that, and then 2019 happened, and the pandemic happened in 2020. And, basically, when they started shutting down the country and they started shutting down businesses and closing churches, church, religion is basically, from a basic sense, untouchable in the Constitution. You can't mess with religion.
That's right.
People have the right to the free exercise of religion. There's the Establishment Clause. Congress shall make no law respecting religion.
Right.
Can't do it. Can't touch it.
Right.
So for the government to say, you can't meet with your brothers and sisters during this scary time, you can't meet with your pastor. I mean, people went around it and met on Zoom, but I'm like, you cannot close churches. And you can't close businesses. How are these small businesses going to survive? I was outraged, but I was apparently the only one who was outraged. It felt like around me, everybody was kowtowing to the rules and, try to be safe. And okay, you can be safe, but you can go to church and be safe. You can go
Amen.
to church, you can wash your hands, you can, if you must wear a mask, you can wear a mask, but, you can social distance if you must, but there was no reason to shut down these churches, and I didn't understand it. So I was outraged. And then there was actually a business owner in New Jersey was really like the canary in the coal mine for me that made me realize these prophecies of Revelation really can come true, and we are really close.
So then it connected back
to
what you were thinking was impossible is now happening. And then, so did you have going back to when you kind of left, was it a problem with the Bible as a whole, or just the interpretation of what people were saying that you disagreed with? What actually made you kind of leave altogether?
It wasn't the Bible as a whole, because I believed the Bible and I believed you should be good to one another.
So you were still like believing this in God?
Yes,
okay.
I still believed in God. I was never atheist. I just felt like every religion thought they were the religion, and everyone thinks they're the right one and everyone else is wrong.
Right.
So I had kind of like an agnostic view, like nobody has proof either way, one way or another, who's right and who's wrong. That was the feeling that I had at the time. Now looking back, and I never disbelieved the Bible, I just didn't believe this prophecy could ever happen. But now coming back to the church, I realize like the Adventist faith is the one that is most true to the Bible and its precepts. Hands down, done. That's it. The Jews are the closest, but they reject Jesus. So that, they at least kept the Sabbath. But all the other religions, they're not keeping all the commandments. They're not following all the Bible's precepts.
And, Adventists have some strong doctrines on things like the Antichrist position, but when you look at those things historically, they're not really Adventist positions, they're Protestant positions.
Yes.
Right? And so when you look at some of the Catholic doctrines, we actually did one recently, our Sabbath Sunday part 2, where we see that they say no Protestant ever has kept the fourth commandment if they've kept Sunday. They're keeping the law of the church. And so you see like a lot of people don't even realize the system that they're in is paying homage to this Antichrist system. So when we're saying like, oh, Adventism's right, we're not putting down other religions. We're simply looking at the Bible principles and saying this group is following these principles closest than any other group out there.
And even more than that, the thing that I think makes Adventism different is its connection to actually the prophetic timeline, because it took place and that was prophesied. The disappointment took place, cleansing of the sanctuary, all these were prophesied. So it's not just that we have found some things that are true in the Bible, that this movement that actually took place was supposed to take place. It's more than even just the most truth. It is a prophesied movement that was supposed to bring
streamline
the message
of time. Like it's going in succession of what it should. It's
just
not
like the
they
children
have
of
some
Israel.
stuff.
The children of Israel had a purpose, then Adventism has a purpose, and unfortunately, early on, that purpose looked impossible to you, but then praise God, it came back because you've seen, actually what they were originally saying there is taking place. So then once you started seeing that, how did that start changing your view on all the things that you had been working on and went to school with?
Well, the one case in New Jersey that was the canary in the coal mine for me and turned me around on this whole thing and made me come back to the church. Even though like it was wrong for churches to shut down across the board, I felt that was wrong. The canary in the coal mine for me was a small gym in Belmar, New Jersey. And you might have heard from them if you watched Tucker Carlson, Attilas Gym. They stood up to Governor Murphy in New Jersey and said, we're not shutting down. We're not shutting down. We use clean practices. You know, we clean the equipment constantly. You know, there's social distancing. We haven't had a single case of COVID. It's, you know, been attributed to this gym. They had like 83,000 visits to their gym and not a single case of COVID. Like, they were extremely responsible, and they said we can keep our business open in a responsible way. But Governor Murphy singled them out and made them an example and really persecuted them and really went after them. They would bolt their doors closed, so the gym owners took the doors off. You know, and they were fined daily, and the fines amounted like millions of dollars of fines. And then what was the last straw for me was, in the middle of their litigation, while the matter was in controversy and on appeal, the state went in and deducted all the money out of their checking account, just seized all monies in their checking account. The gym owner said they woke up and their bank balance was zero.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that is what triggered me. And I said, you know what? Christians, as Seventh-day Adventists, anyone who keeps the Sabbath in the last days, they're going to suffer this type of persecution. They're going to wake up to a bank balance of zero or not able to spend their money.
Right.
If they're worshiping on the wrong day, you know, or they're not worshiping on the prescribed day.
Right.
So that was like, oh, I need to start reading my Bible again, and
Right.
I need to start going to church again. So I started watching Seventh-day Adventist church services on YouTube because, you know, churches were pretty much closed or whatever. I was watching Amazing Facts. I was watching Pastor Doug Batchelor sermons, Stephen Bohr sermons. You know, I was watching all kinds of church services, SDA churches. I had a favorite church in Florida that I would watch their SDA church service, and, you know, the Granite Bay Hilltop church service. So
Yeah, it's amazing to me because what we're talking about is like prophecy coming to reality. And during the health crisis, we saw banks taking aggressive positions for the government, even though they're supposed to be private institutions, and determining whether you can bank with them any longer based on your opinions or your views.
right.
Here we are now. We're getting into why we kind of brought you on, which is the new financial system that I would say the majority of the people have no idea that is being turned on and really has been developed for the last decade.
Yeah.
It is now kind of turning on in the form of FEDNOW.
Yes.
Now, all this we're going to kind of circle it around to talk about no buy, no sell and Sunday law, but I think we can all kind of see, and anybody looking with a keen eye can see traces of that happened during the pandemic. Like
Yeah.
you said, these kind of breakthrough moments where you see these protections that we have, they're there on paper, but when put under the test of stress, we see that governments and private corporations can actually team up to enforce things that governments by themselves cannot do.
And how quickly, just overnight,
Yeah.
goes from, you know, I remember when swine flu came out, everybody was freaking out, and I'm like, guys, it's, you know, it's all good.
It's the flu.
And, you know,
Exactly.
nothing actually went that far. But then when the new thing came, everybody was starting to talk about it. I said, it's all good, it's, you know. And then 2 weeks later, everything is locked.
Yeah.
And you can't move, you can't go. You can't go to the grocery store. The grocery stores were empty. You were, at least in Canada, areas were taped off unless it was deemed essential that you can't even buy it. And that kind of plays into now. Now this is a very simplistic version of the complicated things that they're going to be implementing to restrict. Like, they literally just put tape on the shelves. But the things that they want to plan are even more intense, and this was like a trial run, and people are easy to accept things, and if we see it more and more and more, we get more used to more restrictions and then more restrictions, but it's coming to a head, and they use this as a nice trial run.
Yeah.
And I think it needs to wake up people to see how fast things can be changed.
Yeah, and they're working
Absolutely.
really hard in the background to implement a new system that will essentially allow them to turn you on and off like a light switch. So at
Absolutely.
what point in your journey did you come across this new change in the financial system? And like what was occurring with FedNow? When did you kind of tip off to this?
Well, this was before I had heard about FedNow, but I started reading, because I'm a trader and I follow currency and everything. I started watching more the cryptocurrency and reading crypto news. And the crypto guys are all over this because this directly affects crypto.
Yeah.
So I started to see that the central banks around the world were coming out with central bank digital currency, which is the opposite of crypto. Crypto is decentralized. It's basically a freedom currency. No one authority can tell you you can't use your crypto here, there, or anywhere. There are some coins that are private and some transactions are not private, but still no one can say you can't use your crypto here, there, anywhere unless they outright pass a law, or the place where you're buying something from says we won't accept crypto. I mean, you can use your crypto pretty much wherever it's accepted.
Mm-hmm.
Central bank digital currency is the opposite. It is programmable and traceable. So the government is the one issuing it, or your central bank, and they can see exactly what transactions you're making, and they can stop you from making those transactions. They can program your currency not to work on certain items or under certain circumstances. If they wanted to enforce a 15-minute city and not let you out of your 15-minute zone, they could program your currency not to work around that 15-minute radius. If they wanted to, say, restrict your purchase of guns or anything else they deem non-essential or threatening to them, they could turn off the currency as to those items. Because most items have purchase codes, and you can tell, what people are buying.
So how is that different from like a credit card?
Well, really, and I've heard Richard Warner say this, and he's actually absolutely right. What we've lived with all this time, although we don't always use physical cash, green pieces of paper, we use a form of digital currency in our credit cards and bank cards.
Mm-hmm.
We use bank digital currency. That's really what it is. It's bank digital currency. Numbers get flipped around to reflect the balances.
Yeah.
But the difference is the banks have been very good about protecting our privacy for the most part. Now, there have been some situations like Bank of America gave away all their customers' information over
Wells
the January 6th
Fargo's had a data breach.
incident.
Yeah, they've all had like issues, but I almost feel like it's those have been put in so that way they're catalysts to like getting to this one centralized entity, which would be then something like FedNow.
Yeah,
Right?
I agree with you. Yeah, I agree.
So can you tell us a little bit, what is FedNow? And how is it different than the past?
Well, FedNow is an infrastructure for instant payments. So it's right now, it's not retail right now, it's kind of wholesale. Banks and service providers are using it. There's only a little more than 50 entities are certified to participate in FedNow.
Right.
So some of those are banks, some of those are service providers and liquidity providers. The major banks have signed on to it. BNY Mellon, JP Morgan Chase, they're all right in with FedNow.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an instant payment service, but it's an instant payment service that goes through the Fed, which means that the Fed gets to see every one of your transactions. If you're making a transfer from this bank to another bank, it goes through the Fed and the Fed sees that.
Right.
And eventually where they want to take it is that more retailers are using FedNow and retail customers are using FedNow. Then they'll see all of your transactions because they all get rerouted through the federal government. And people who voluntarily use this, I don't think people realize, they're unwittingly giving up their Fourth Amendment right to privacy and unreasonable search and seizure. Because if right now, before FedNow, if the government wanted information on what you're spending your money on, they would have to subpoena that from the bank or
So
from whatever bank you're
is that
using.
government or is that private? How is that structured?
The Fourth Amendment says that the government cannot unreasonably search or unreasonably seize your property.
Right.
And that is a privacy that's guaranteed to Americans through that Fourth Amendment. So if they want to make a search, they've got to go to a court, they got to get a subpoena, and they've got to prove to the court why they should have the subpoena. They've got to, make certain levels of proof, reasonable cause, probable cause, That's the criminal system. They have to go to a judge and get an order. They got to get a court order and a subpoena to go and look at your bank accounts if they want that.
And is FEDNOW government or private?
FedNow is de facto government because it's the central bank, but the central bank
Isn't even really, it has private shareholders in it.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and it's actually the only country where the central bank does have private shareholders is
It
in the
does.
United States. And I'll just use as a comparison. During the trucker protests in Canada, they froze bank accounts.
Yes.
No subpoenas. They then went through, and in order to see whose bank accounts to freeze, they had to look at every single Canadian's bank accounts and every single transaction, because otherwise, how would you know who's donated, who's supporting? In America, you couldn't do that without a legal court order establishing that was necessary based on a body of evidence that concluded that there was something illegal happening.
Correct.
In Canada, there is no such framework that the Canadian government literally was able to do that without any approval to allow them to do so. And so if one of the examples I heard is like FedNow is almost like an hourglass, where
Yes.
before everyone was kind of living in their own ecosystem bubbles and privacy was maintained, that you can only extract information with either user permission or a court order. Now you have this hourglass where all the information is being funneled down through this one central point and coming out the other side. And so if you have, like as we saw during the pandemic, people's choices making like impact and restricting their economic viability, whether it's owning a business or freezing a bank account or whatever, now all that information has been centralized into that one funnel. And I've actually heard some interviews where they're talking about FedNow, while is not mandatory, it will be universally adopted, because what's going to happen is when people go on these new quantum rails, everyone who's not on them will be so far behind technologically that they won't be able to compete. And so what you have is this adoption out of necessity for dying off. So it's like you own a business and I own a business and we're both couriers. I have a car, you have a horse and buggy. You're not mandatory to use a car, but who's going to get more business and who will eventually survive and who will die?
Yep.
Right.
This new FedNow system will essentially be universally adopted because you won't be able to survive without using the new rails
Right.
Well,
in an
it's
efficient
like
manner, cost-effective manner.
We have
too.
something on us basically all the time. Can we survive without this right now? It's virtually impossible.
Yeah.
Or
Absolutely.
it appears impossible, right?
Yeah.
And also, it'll be so ridiculously convenient that, like, people rely on their cell phones. They're going to want this instant payment and then rely on that and then demand that. So-
Exactly.
It's like tapping the card, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
all
Some
getting
people
closer.
don't even know their pins. Just like
Yeah.
just tap.
It used to be swipe, now it's tap. Eventually it'll be contactless
Yeah, it's swipe
completely.
and sign.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I grew up with in Saskatchewan. We're way behind back
Yeah,
there, so
yeah.
we still had to sign for it all.
That's right.
But now it's just like,
Well, it's interesting because payments in most third world countries, people are using all their banking on their mobile phones. Oddly enough, they have, almost everyone in third world countries have cell phones. They don't necessarily have laptops and other traditional banking platforms. So this new system actually allows these people to be fully banked now, because their mobile phones now become the means to transact in real time across the world for very little fee. What's interesting about that is Elon Musk and Twitter, changing it to X.com, he's now introduced payments onto the platform and said that new payments are coming. So when you hold up your phone, like, yes, this will now be like your main financial instrument, but with that will come a whole host of privacy issues, legal issues, like you said, giving up your Fourth Amendment. They're going to pitch this whole thing as what? Easy payments, convenience to the retail. But talk to us a little bit about maybe the darker side of things. You did talk about programmability, and I'll say from what I understand about cryptocurrency, it is decentralized to a point. Like Bitcoin is totally decentralized because you don't have a centralized authority. But
Right.
there are other cryptos out there that do kind of have those who are making, they don't own the crypto, you can use it without the company, but they're the ones that make the utility for the crypto realized.
Right.
So for instance, there are instruments, crypto instruments, that make the financial institutions worlds way better. So they're decentralized, but they're centralized in the fact that their job is to make the central banks more profitable, more efficient, more oversight. So in that, you kind of have this, the crypto being used, even though it's decentralized, to centralize all the information using the blockchain technology to bring it in. And when we see things like China with their social credit scores, new ESG or basically climate change initiatives for companies where you're going to be docked and taxed, do you see all this kind of coming together with FEDNOW in making a system where literally every transaction is down, retail, institutional, and otherwise is in this one place? And how could that, do you see that being able to be maybe manipulated in a way that could lead to no buy and no sell?
Well, it's simple. Yeah, I do see it that way. And FedNow is basically the instant payment issuer that needs to be in place before the U.S. can bring in its own CBDC.
Right.
There are a number of countries around the world that already have a CBDC. A lot of the Caribbean countries, Bahamas, Anguilla,
Montenegro has one, I think they launched.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dominican,
Yep.
Republic. So all these little countries have them. The ECB, they're working on their own, central bank digital currency. All the major G7 countries around the world are working on it.
Yes.
We know that our government is working on it, and we know that President Biden issued that executive order making it a priority to explore central bank digital currency. So he wants it. The Fed's going to bring it on eventually. This needed to be the infrastructure to do that. And the problem with central bank digital currency is that it is fully traceable, fully programmable, and they can tell you what you can and cannot buy,
right.
and all your transactions will be on this ledger.
Yeah.
So they can profile you. And even with FedNow, one of its capabilities, even though it's at its first phase and it doesn't have that many capabilities, it does have basic capabilities to generate reports and generate profiles on what kind of a consumer you are.
That's right.
What are you buying?
Right.
Does the government like that or not like that, or think that could possibly be a threat to them?
It's like Google Analytics now applied to financial system, which is
correct.
Really
yeah, which is
scary.
very dangerous. And true financial freedom is the freedom to make whatever financial transactions you wish to make in the privacy, with some privacy, without the government looking over your shoulder or any authority looking over your shoulder saying, no, you can't spend your money on that. If you don't have that freedom, you're not free. That is true freedom. True financial freedom is true freedom. And if you don't have that, you are not a free person. And the problem with central bank digital currency is that they can limit that. I just read an article the other day, a developer of the Brazilian central bank digital currency saw in the code that not only can they freeze balances, they can also adjust them. So if our only medium of exchange is central bank digital currency, the central banks can tailor their monetary policy down to the individual. They can say, you know what, you're spending too much money. We're not going to let you have so much money, or you're saving too much money. The currency is going to expire in 30 days, or our economic numbers are not looking good enough because we're a consumer-based economy. So we want Americans spending their money. So we're going to make the currency expire in 30 days. That is all a feature of central bank digital currency.
Yep.
And these central banks look at it not only as a feature, as a favorable feature, because they think that it's bad for a currency to be out there for too long. They want to see it circulating through the economy.
Yeah, I think there's people out there who, they think this is fear-mongering, that the United States could never do that. There's a small country in the islands called Palau. Have you heard of Palau?
Yes.
They developed their own stablecoin. Now, Palau is basically a strategic military position for the U.S. government. They use U.S. dollars. Everything they do is funded by the U.S. They actually created Palau's stablecoin. And anybody who looks at it can see that this was the pilot project for a central bank digital currency for America being run in Palau. And it's active right now. I think they finished it like a week or two ago. They showed demonstrations of it being used. So this isn't fear-mongering.
No, it's not. The New York Fed's been working on a pilot project. The Boston Fed is what put together FedNow. They basically, came up with FedNow, designed it.
Yep.
They were tasked with that. The New York Fed tasked with the pilot program for the digital currency.
Yep.
I mean, this is happening. This is not fear-mongering.
No,
this
it's
is
not.
not scaring. This is not speculating.
No.
It's happening right now, and they're telling us it's happening.
Yeah.
Their papers are coming out and showing us this is happening.
And their conferences, they're literally on camera telling you they're going to program the currency and that it can dissolve at the end of the month. Like, we have video clips of these things.
Yes,
It's quite intense.
It's
So
a reality. It's not.
When this comes down to the individual, and they think, well, they can't really do that because I worked for the money, so how do they have the right to even put a 30-day limit on my money? How does that work? So we're going to be pressured, like you were saying, because of convenience-wise, because of incentive-wise, to adopt this new thing. And I'm assuming you're going to have to skip through an agreement like nobody reads them that gives them the rights to basically do this because it's held privately and they can make the case judgment individual basis. So when you opt into the structure, you are revoking your Fourth Amendment, right?
Absolutely, you are, and you're probably agreeing to all those things. How many people read the terms and conditions when you sign on to anything? Nobody reads that stuff anymore. Very few people read that.
Yeah.
Catherine Austin Fitz reads it.
You know, I've read a lot of them, and then I have problems, and I'm like, yeah, but I still need to use the service.
Exactly.
So I know it's in there, and I still have to agree with it. What good did it do me to read the terms and conditions?
You really have to, you really have to be strong to stand up to these terms and conditions.
Yeah.
Because the result is you're not going to be able to use the service you want to use if you disagree with the terms and conditions.
Yeah. And I think, you know, this is speculation. So I'm going to say it's speculation, but let's just put our hats on to say, well, how could you get most of the country on central bank digital currency if they don't want it? Well, they say never let a good crisis go to waste.
Right.
Universal basic income has been trialed through the United States, Canada, and around the world in various forms and fashions. In fact, when they released the stimulus money in the United States for COVID payments, they almost issued those in United States digital dollars. And there was a group called the Digital Dollar Project. It's run by a guy named Chris Giancarlo and his brother and two others. They're all Roman Catholics.
Wow.
Yeah. And right now, the Digital Dollar Project is at the forefront of bringing this, they're going to call it like a stable coin and central bank, they're going to intermingling, so because even the state of Florida has passed laws that they're not going to allow CBDCs. Like the warning signs are up, yet they're still going to infuse it in. So instead of making those payments, because the project wasn't ready yet, they did them with the checks. But in future scenarios like that, let's say in the crazy world that something like that happens again, and they need to stimulate the economy, and people's jobs have been uprooted. And let's say AI has, by 2025, 27, whatever, evolved so much that most remedial jobs have been completely removed. You now have this large contingent of people who need income.
Yeah.
And so instead of protesting for against central bank digital currencies, they say, I need food, I need water, I need a place to live. And now, okay, well, here's the government ready to give you $3,000 a month instantaneously, but it comes with these strings attached. So for me, it's almost like you're ready to not use something until you absolutely need it. So really all they need to do is create the circumstances where you absolutely need it. And then you're asking for it. You don't need your Fourth Amendment right because you need to eat. You need a place for your daughter or your son to sleep. And so they really put the screws on. And for me, that's something that COVID really woke me up on, is like how willing people are to give things up, not because they want to, but because they feel like they have to.
Yeah.
And that at that point, you really put the person against the dictates of their conscience and the dictates of their well-being. And unfortunately, a lot of people will default to the well-being rather than trusting God and standing for what's right in their conscience. Right. So I almost feel like a lot of the rebellion against it will be drowned out by a crisis that makes it necessary.
Right.
So therefore, you know, introducing UBI becomes something we ask for rather than something that's forced on us.
Right.
Using CBDC is something we ask for rather than it's used on us. And it kind of creates this environment where it's like, okay, now let's get to like this no buy, no sell Sunday law, where you can kind of see how these things can kind of snowball into the conditions where everybody's on this system out of necessity, basically. And now you're stuck into the restrictions of the framework of, let's say, 17 sustainable development goals or whatever the current ESG movement is saying. Or now, because you're hooked on that and you don't have any way out of it, you're required to fit. And then once that's there, we see once they have the power to do it, they'll increase the restrictions, they'll increase the amount of things that you have to, or restrict what you can do. And it all makes perfect sense now that we have the health crisis as this real world example. And I think the scariest part for me, and I won't say it's scary, but it's just eye-opening, is how fast everything happened within the COVID crisis. So People
Yeah.
are saying, yeah, but that's going to be 10 years from now by the time, because you have to go through all these. No,
No.
you just need the right crisis
Exactly.
to implement this. And now with Biden giving the World Health Organization heavy-handed powers to say when a pandemic is, what you can do, when
Yeah.
it's over, you've basically given up your sovereignty to a multinational
And that's not
organization.
even decided by the country
It's
anymore.
not.
No.
And the weird thing was, I did a program called the Prophecy Report where we looked at Tedros Adhanom. And when you look at Tedros Adhanom, he's got a scary background with his role within the Tigray People's Liberation Front. You're dealing with somebody who's like heavy-handed communist,
Yeah.
is now at the head of an organization that can supersede your constitution and your Bill of Rights or whatever protections you have in place in the name of health.
Well, yeah, all these foreign entities that we've, especially the WHO that we've handed our sovereignty over to thanks to Biden,
Yeah.
they're completely unelectable, they're unaccountable, they can basically do whatever they want, and we can't really say anything about it.
Right.
We don't have any voting power there.
No.
And it's the same thing with the Bank of International Settlements. The Bank of International Settlements just released a report on June 20th laying out their plan for a unified ledger and to tokenize all private property.
Yeah, I was reading about that.
Yeah, so that means that your house, your car, your boat would be assigned a digital token to it that would be coded with smart contracts and rules and regulations as to how you can own the object, how you can transfer ownership of the object, and how you can retain ownership of the object. So what's the next requirement? You have to take this inoculation.
Which is the number 4 on the Sustainable Development Goals. It says end all poverty everywhere is the number 1 goal, which Jesus said the poor will be with you always.
Right.
So you have these contrasting statements where one is like give up everything to end poverty that's never going to end, which
That's
is
never
basically
gonna
just to
end.
mean to get rid of. But when you go to number 4, it says good health. And on the UN website, you can open the boxes that have the goals. And inside it says good health equals getting your health shots.
Yeah.
So one, that means that they're not done with this thing, that this was the opening act, not the closing
Of
one.
course. This was a dry run.
This is the dry run, and they were quite successful.
They
at
were
it.
very successful. People, rolled over way too quickly. Just threw their constitutional rights out the window.
But they trust the government
fear.
more than they trust their
It's
own
fear.
conscience.
Fear
They
driven,
let
right?
fear override them.
And
That's the problem.
that's going to be the thing when people think, oh, this can't happen, that can't happen. I think that's what you were thinking too originally. Oh, they can't make Sunday law. You can't buy or sell. But when fear is the driving force, and there's a catastrophe that we can't let go to waste, whether we create it or it's natural, whatever. And life's on the line, food's on the line, my house, my family, I got kids, I got this, and what am I gonna do? I just gotta go with it, because if not, we're gonna starve to death or something. But that's where I think the prophecies are given to us, because then we can know ahead, because we're told, hey, there's gonna be no buy, no sell. Hey, Noah, there's gonna be a flood, and you need to build a boat. And we need to be seeing these things, not just saying, okay, everybody just freak out, get terrified, there's no solution. Well, there's some solution. God tells you ahead of time so that, okay, maybe you should know how to grow some food, and you should know how to, homesteading kind of things, and
Homesteading.
all the thing that,
Yeah.
unfortunately, or fortunately, a lot of the world is waking up to this right now, and you see more and more and more people moving out. But unfortunately, some of the most important people that should be talking about this are either not able to or not speaking as openly. We need to be giving this message. This is what Adventism was created to do.
Yeah.
First, second, third angel's message. That's what our whole
Commission is,
Seventh-day Adventism is. Ellen White says that nothing else should take our attention but the first, second, and third angel's message. And the third angel's message is, don't take the mark of the beast.
Yeah.
Well, how do you do that? You have to be ready for it.
Yeah.
You have to do like Noah did. Jesus connected our time to Noah in Matthew 24 and 25, saying, no, and then it was also said that Noah was faithful, and he showed his faith because of what he did.
Yeah.
So this
Absolutely.
isn't to tell people you need to save your own skin necessarily,
No.
but wake up, be aware, because if you know that there's a gunman around the corner, maybe don't go and walk down the
You're
alley.
going to have a different strategy
know?
than if you didn't know.
Yeah, maybe
Exactly.
go the other way or
Right.
something.
And I think like the big thing for people to take is like this whole thing is supposed to give you confidence to let the livelihood go if you need to, because
Yeah.
God will take care. He won't leave you or forsake you.
Yeah.
Right? And
right.
so this is supposed to give you confidence that when that choice comes, the cross to go left or right with the devil or with God, you don't hold your life and well-being over the principles that God gave you.
Right.
Because that, if we're alive long enough, that decision is going to be made by every person on earth.
Everyone's going to have to make that decision.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to make people aware of what's happening. I started a Substack. It's called Revelation 13:17 cbdcwatch.substack.com. And I've been making these issues aware and citing relevant Bible passages. We just need to be prepared. And being prepared means we're in a parable of the 10 virgins situation. Okay?
Yeah.
People are sleeping. We're sleeping. But we want to have our oil tanks full. We want our little reserve containers of oil full, which means that we need to have a personal relationship with God every day. Ask for the Holy Spirit to, be present in your life every day. Don't miss your morning devotion with God. Don't, make sure you're reading your Bible and praying every morning and asking for God's presence in your life. And keep that constant connection with God, like
Amen.
Enoch did when he walked with God, like
Yeah.
Noah did when he walked with God, because it's that constant connection with God that's going to guide us going forward. And we need God's guidance because it's going to be a scary time, and I don't want people to freak out and just paralyze themselves. Build skills, learn new skills, learn how to forage. We might have to be in the woods for a while, wandering around the wilderness eventually.
Yeah.
You might want to know what plants you should eat or could eat and
Yeah.
which have medicinal properties,
That's right.
which have food value.
That's the
Grow
right
your
arm
own-
of the gospel is the health message,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think it's what gives the weight to the third angel's message too, because
Yeah.
when you're tending to people's health needs, they're a lot more willing to hear about prophecy and mark of the beast and some of these other things. Now, just to kind of wrap up here, can you give us that Substack one more time?
Sure, it's Revelation 13:17 cbdcwatch.substack.com.
And brothers and sisters, go watch and listen and read what she's presented. I think there's no question here that we're getting close.
We are getting close. We're getting dangerously close, and people just are not seeing it and not being aware, and that's why I'm trying to make this awareness. Like, CBDC is the key that unlocks Revelation 13:17.
Yeah.
Bottom line,
Yep.
there has to be some financial repression in order that that verse can be true, where you can't buy or sell unless you have the mark of the beast.
Yep.
Well, we don't want to take the mark of the beast. We want to be sealed
Yeah.
with the seal of God,
Amen.
which means we want to, number one, keep all of God's commandments, because we show our love to God when we keep His commandments and have the faith of Jesus. Those are the two requirements.
That's it.
And fully stated in Revelation, those are the two requirements, to be one
The
of the
remnant.
saints at the end.
Yeah. And then the faith of Jesus and the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy.
Correct.
Is understanding that aspect.
And once you get that, don't just keep it to yourself. Save the people around you.
Don't bury it.
Exactly. Don't say, okay, I'm Adventist, I'm fine,
Yeah.
I got this.
Yeah.
Help your neighbors around you, because like Revelation says that God's remnant church is going to come from all different places. They're going
Amen.
to come out of all these other denominations. We need to help lead them out. We need to help show them the way, because we've been tasked with the spirit of prophecy and spreading that. We need to guide people out of Babylon
And make
And
that call.
sharing,
ready.
and sharing is the best way to get familiar yourself. When you see the need and you start telling people, then you remember.
Yeah.
Because we know that when push comes to shove and they start questioning you, hey, you're not allowed to buy and sell, we're going to fine you, we're going to whatever because you're not doing along with what the system says. Can you even prove to me why you have this conviction? Because I'll sit here and prove to you against using the Bible that you don't need to keep the Sabbath, or you don't need to do this, or whatever it may be, and we need to be able to have an answer
Right.
from our mind.
We need
not
to know the Bible well enough to
Yeah.
be able to explain the difference and explain through history what happened with Sunday. That
Yes.
Sunday was totally a creation of the Catholic Church, of
Right.
the papacy.
And they are very proud and tell you for
They
the
are
last
very proud. Yeah.
1,000+ years.
In their documents, they're
Yeah.
very proud of that, and
Encyclicals.
they mock the Protestants for taking their Sunday.
and Christmas and Easter and
Yeah.
like they really just tell us that look, you're holding our tradition, and we
Yeah.
know that the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet will come together towards the end to create this system, and hopefully today we were able to just shed a little bit of light on these kind of real world right now changes that are happening, and also hopefully give you guys hope. This is not meant to scare you. This is meant to educate so you're prepared. So Eva, thank you so much for coming to talk to us.
My
Maybe
pleasure.
we'll go even deeper on a more formal Truth Matters episode, but it was
Yes.
great meeting you at ASI.
It was wonderful meeting you. Thank you for having me
We'll
on.
be
Yes,
praying
thank
for
you.
your ministry efforts and
Thank you.
looking forward to our final commission here together, Three Angels
Thank you.
Messages. And
Yes, thank you. And
Praise God.
everybody will be having some more live interviews with different people. as
Who
it
do we have
comes.
tonight?
Actually, we have Walt Cross tonight. So we'll be talking with him at 9:30 ASI time.
Which would be Central Time. So if you're East, it's an hour later, 10:30. If you're Pacific, it will be 2 hours before, and that will be 7:30. So join us then, and thank you again.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you for having me.